In a small town known as Denbrook, a carefree shepherd known as George is writing a letter to his estranged daughter Rebecca, telling her how he's been living his life lately and how he takes good care of his sheep like they are his little children because they are all special to him, and that's why he gave each one a name. For instance, the two sheeps that keep fighting all the time he calls Ronnie and Reggie, one of the oldest and most dignified amongst them he calls Sir Richfield, the fluffiest of the sheep he calls Cloud, Zora the most curious, Mopo the most patient, and finally Lincoln the one with the most wool. Since all of his sheep are special to him, George mentions that there are two unique sheeps he admires the most. One of them is Sebastian, his biggest ram who's a loner just like him. Sooner or later he wanders off into the woods, and sooner or later he comes back to the farm. Finally, his smartest sheep happens to be Lily, the only sheep who seems to know and understand what he's feeling. Above all the other sheeps, Lily brings him a peace that only a shepherd gets to experience. George starts each day by feeding the flock, then grooming them and finally giving them their medications. Whenever his chores are done for the day, George picks a detective novel to read out loud to the sheeps, which they all seem to enjoy. This time, George ends the reading abruptly by leaving a cliffhanger that makes the sheep unhappy as they demand to know the end of the story, but since he can't understand them he tells them to wait for the end tomorrow. While the sheeps argue and speculate about the crime suspect in the book, Lily, being the smartest among the sheep, tells them who the killer from the story could be. No one believes her until the next day she's proven to be right when George mentions the killer and it was the same person Lily suspected it to be. Earning the respect of the flock. George also talks about the 3 playful lambs he has amongst his flocks who were born in the spring. However, sheeps have a way of isolating a lamb that was born during winter as they consider the winter lamb to be different from their flock. George, however, treats the estranged lamb with so much care that the other sheep start to get jealous. In the town, George hears the church bell ringing and heads towards it. Following this, George introduces us to some of the other people he knows, just like another shepherd known as Caleb, a butcher whom he doesn't like, Beth an innkeeper who doesn't like George in the slightest, Tim the policeman, whom he considers an idiot, and finally a reverend father whom he calls a shepherd of men but has a complicated relationship with him. While the church service is still ongoing, George walks in slowly while everyone stares at him. He takes the offering plate and drops a chunk of money in it before telling the reverend that he's here to settle his debt and walks away almost immediately. Following his letters to Rebecca, George hopes for her to come to visit him and his flock, begging her to pay them a visit. In the morning, Caleb arrives at the farm with his 2 dogs and gets into George's caravan, while Ronnie and Reggie contemplates head-butting Caleb's car, but Lily stops them just in time to remind them that they shouldn't just bash things unless there's a reason to. Mopo walks up to Lily to tell her that this is the second time Caleb is visiting their farm and thinks they want to combine their flocks, only for George to be seen angrily pushing Caleb out of his caravan. Since they were so happy about combining flocks for a moment and then sad again, Lily proposes that they all take a moment to forget what happened, since sheeps can choose to forget a moment anytime they want to, except for Mopo, who doesn't have the same ability. Lily begs him not to remind them that this happened, and after the count of 3, the whole sheep forgets about Caleb's visit except Mopo, who remembers everything and chooses not to say anything. Afterwards, George gets out of his van looking very angry, causing Lily to walk up to him with a concerned look, so George tells her not to worry as they'll all be okay. Inside the town, Beth the innkeeper was visited by the postal service lady, who has come to collect the townsfolk's letters and deliver them to the post office. As she sorted through the stack, Beth notices George's letter and asks about it. Although the postal lady wasn't supposed to discuss anyone's correspondence, she leans in and confides that George had been sending letters like this for nearly a month, to a woman in America named Rebecca Hamsterd. Getting jealous, Beth waits for when the postal lady is about to leave and sneakily takes the letter for herself. She's about to read it when a young man comes into the inn. He's here from the city to cover the story of the town's cultural festival, so Beth takes him to a space where there's only books, paintings, and cakes with no one in sight. Frustrated that there's no juicy story in this small town, Elliot decides to leave the town that evening. Because of the storm that's fast approaching, George doesn't tell the sheep a nighttime story, so Sir Richfield comes up with his own story about how the sheep ends up being part of the cloud when their life comes to an end. Lily adds that her parents also turned to clouds at the end of their lives, but she doesn't remember how it was, and asks Mopo to tell her how it was since he remembers everything. Not wanting to ruin the moment for the lambs, Mopo shares a beautiful story of how Lily's parents eventually turned into clouds after their time here on Earth was done. Elliot ends up crashing his car because of the storm and he's picked up by one of the townspeople. During the ride he notices a sudden flashlight coming from George's caravan and gets suspicious. In the morning, Mopo finds Lily standing next to George while he's lying on the floor unconscious. Mopo asks what she's doing and Lily replies that she thinks George is playing a game where the first to move loses. Getting suspicious, Mopo gets close and touches George with his hooves closely and learns that he isn't breathing. Mopo sadly tells Lily that George is dead. Lily doesn't believe that death is real as it has always been told in George's nighttime stories, and asks if he would turn into a cloud just like sheep do in the end. Mopo's response is rather negative, causing Lily to lie next to George's body and affectionately reach for his hand. Lily then shares the news with the rest of the sheep, who remain frantic and demands what to do from Lily since she's the smartest one among them. Lily tells everyone that she feels so sad and wants them to forget about George. Mopo protests against the idea, but Lily replies that remembering him hurts too much. Just as they were about to count down to 3, Sebastian shows up and tells everyone that they will forget nothing. He isn't going to stand and watch them forget their loving shepherd just like that. They'll all remember him because it's the right thing to do. He goes on to tell the flock about justice, saying to them that George has been kind to all of them and that is why he only needs them for their will only. He's about to tell them about what other parts of them could be used when Mopo shuts him up. Zara comes up with her existential questions about the significance of human life on Earth if they could just die at any time, and why are they here in the first place, mentioning that George could have been murdered. Shocked by this revelation, Lily asks Zara if she saw anything, and she shares that every nighttime story George has always told them is that dead people are always murdered. Lily was about to conclude that there's no way George could have been murdered, until she remembered his hat. Later, Caleb arrives to have George sign some agreement papers when he found the body and reported it to the police. Seeing the butcher also in the farm, the officer questions Caleb about his presence and he replies that the butcher wants the sheep. Wondering why George came outside during the rainstorm without his hat and raincoat, with the help of Mopo, Lily tries looking into the caravan through the window for clues, where she finds a whiskey bottle with 2 glasses. Elliot soon arrives after learning that there's some mystery to uncover in the not-so-little town. The officer tells him that he believes George had a heart attack. Elliot questions that something must have been out of the ordinary, but Tim tells him that he's looked everywhere and found no clue. When Elliot learns that Tim hasn't checked inside the caravan, he forces him to go look inside together. After looking around, Elliot concludes that there's no way George could have had a heart attack outside the caravan, and he points at where George might have collapsed at first before taking a picture of the bottle of whiskey with the 2 glasses. Tim refuses that anything would have happened to him except for a heart attack because since he's been in Denbrook, there hasn't been any case of murder. On the other side, Lily tells the flock that she believes George was murdered. Sebastian asks if that's what the officer said and she says no, but she believes that George was murdered. Sebastian mocks her for being very optimistic with her claims. Not letting Sebastian get into her head, Lily goes ahead to share her murder theory with the rest of the flock. According to her, she believes George was visited by someone he knew very well for him to offer the person a drink, and he then got sick. The failure of his visitor to alert anyone to his illness and the lack of physical injuries suggests that George was poisoned by his said visitor. The paint in his hand shows that he struggled with the killer, but the suspect escaped. She assures everyone that she never guesses and the police are not going to find the killer, just like the nighttime stories, and proposes that they need to uncover the killer by themselves. Sebastian laughs at her confidence in trying to solve the case as she isn't capable of uncovering anything, advising her to leave the case to the humans and return to her barn. Not listening to Sebastian, Lily indulges the other sheep to look around the farm for clues, but after a while the search for clues becomes unproductive, so Lily tells them to forget about looking for clues and asks if anyone saw anything on the night of the murder. Mopo reveals that he saw Sebastian moving around the farm when George was murdered. However, Sebastian denies any form of involvement as there was no possible way he could have poisoned the man who's been taking good care of all them. Hearing the church bell ring from the distance, they decided to head towards the town to find clues. Since it's their first time leaving the farm, Sebastian guides Lily to cross the asphalt after seeing a rooster cross it. After making it to the church, the sheep watch as Tim announces the death of Georgie, revealing by mistake that he was poisoned. Proving that Lily was right. Tim points out that the fruit that contains the poisonous toxins grows on the yew tree behind the church, meaning he was killed by one of the townspeople. The moment is interrupted by the arrival of George's lawyer Lydia, and the daughter Rebecca, to read George's will to everyone mentioned in his letter to the lawyer. At the gathering, Tim tells Rebecca that it's odd that she's here today since there's no way someone from America could make it her on time since he just declared George's demise not long ago. Rebecca replies that she was in town and was supposed to meet her father before the news of his death was announced. Rebecca also shares that she had a twin brother that George told her about recently, and he's currently in South Africa. When Lydia joins the gathering, She kicks Elliot out before settling to read out George's will. Rebecca's twin brother is then called to join them through the phone, who's known as Van Vuren. George sent a copy of the original will 2 months ago, but Lydia refuses to read it out since George sent another one 3 days ago. Inside the will, George reveals his purpose of calling out everyone who's present in the room because he has some unfinished business with them. According to George, he believes that in the room is a fool, a bad shepherd, a victim, and spring and winter lamb, and finally 2 murderers. While everyone argues among themselves, Sebastian and Lily observes everyone's reaction through the window. Lydia continues reading the will, where George offers his son that's in South Africa the 300 acres of land currently leased to Caleb. To his daughter Rebecca, he gives the 300 acres of farm. In conclusion, Hardy left the remainder of his assets to charity known as the Society for the Protection of Animals. However, in the new will, George gives out the remainder of his assets to Rebecca, including a sum of $30 million he has in an offshore account. According to Lydia, 2 years ago George created a remedy for sheep disease known as ord, which was the blue goo he gave to Richfield every morning. George sold the potent to a big agricultural firm, which was how he came about the $30 million. Mopo ends up getting his head stuck on a barn. Mopo manages to break himself loose and ends up falling some stacks of furnitures. This noise causes the group to pause their activities, where Tim goes outside and gets jumped by Mopo, whose face is covered by a cloth. After the meeting, Elliot approaches Tim for them to work together to uncover the murder case so he can be called the town's hero. That evening, Rebecca visits the farm where she plays a little with the winter lamb while the flock watches from the barn. Her investigation plan, Lily recalls that the last book George read to them teaches them how to narrow down a suspect, so with the help of Wooly, they were able to get the particular book. While looking through the pictures Elliot gave to him, Tim hears something on his door and goes outside to check it and finds a book lying on the floor. That night, Sebastian shares a story of how George rescued him from the circus, where humans would put him against ferocious dogs. George found him suffering and brought him to the farm. Wondering why Sebastian doesn't have his own flock, Lily realizes that Sebastian is a winter lamb. Following the teachings from the book the sheep brought to Tim last night. With the knowledge from the book, Tim has already made a board containing 6 suspects, who might have the means, motive and opportunity to murder George. Tim believes that all of the suspects has a means, which is the poisonous berry tree that every one of them has access to, so they need to find the suspect with the motive and opportunity, that way they'll find the murderer. Following this, Elliot and Tim goes around town interrogating every suspect, after talking with the butcher. They proceed to interrogate Beth, who tells them that she's not the killer but a victim and refuses to say anything further. Caleb shares that he only came to the barn to ask him to reconsider his lease on the farm when he found him dead and had nothing to do with the death. When they meet the Reverend to ask why George made a large donation to the church the day before he died, and the Reverend shares that years ago George came to the church to give up his kids because he was young and couldn't take care of them. The church couldn't tell them where the kids were, so since he needed money to repair the church building, he accepted the donation to give up that information, knowing fully well that if the church found out, he would be fired. When they asked Rebecca where she was between a certain time of the night, she replies that she was in her hotel room watching the news. Before leaving, Tim reveals that they found out she changed her name from Cramps to Rebecca not long ago with the help of her ex, who has a record for multiple counts of forgery. When they also asks her about being in Gerard's farm lately, Rebecca denies it. At the farm, the sheeps are starting to think Rebecca is the murderer because she lied about her presence at the farm the other day, only for the winter lamb to appear, saying Rebecca is innocent because she smells like George and George loved him. Remembering that Cloud said something about Rebecca smelling like George, Lily turns to Cloud for some answers, because there was no way she could have known Rebecca smelt like George from that distance. Now in a tight spot, Cloud is forced to reveal that she kept her first encounter with Rebecca a secret because she left her a gift when she came the night George was killed, which was her bangle. Cloud also shares that she loved the thing so much so she decided to keep it a secret. With this, Lily concludes that Rebecca is the murderer. At that moment, Sebastian makes a sudden appearance to tell everyone that a shiny metal doesn't solve anything. Lily calls it an evidence of her actions, because she lied to the police that she was never here the night George died, calling her a liar and a winter lamb. Sebastian feels betrayed after hearing what Lily said about winter lambs. He tells Lily that he believes that Rebecca had nothing to do with George's death. Later during the day, Tim finds a sheep staring at him, while Mopo grabs his hat and runs away with Lily while Tim chases after them all the way to the farm. When he finally gets to take his cap, Tim finds Rebecca bangle and thanks the sheep for the evidence. With this, Elliot goes to Rebecca's room and with a police warrant, searches the room for more clues or evidence. He finds a boot that has the poisonous tree seed under it and immediately arrests her for the murder of George. After the arrest, Lily pays Rebecca a visit at her cell to see if she truly was capable of killing her own father. Later that evening, Lily confides in Mopo asking if she did the right thing by making sure Rebecca is put behind bar for George's murder. Mopo only tells her he believes her judgment ever since she was able to complete George's story even before it ends. Following this, the duo decides to go over to Caleb's farm to meet the other sheep since they'll be combined real soon. When they make it over to Caleb's side of the meadow, they eventually find the flock sheep who tells them to run. While trying to find their way out of the place, they come across a box, indicating that Caleb works with Ham the butcher to sell sheep's meat at the market. At that moment, Mopo hears the dogs bark and fast approaching. The two runs as fast as their hooves could carry them, but Lily's feet are starting to fail her, but before the dog could bite her, Sebastian hits the dog away. A fight ensues between Sebastian and the two dogs. Though Sebastian was able to use his huge body and strong horns to overpower the two dogs, his body eventually fails him and dies, allowing the two sheep to escape before Caleb could find them. When they make it back to the farm, Lily instructs everyone to follow her. Just as they're about to cross the road, everyone stops to ask why do they have to leave. Lily shares in horror that Sebastian is dead. This news terrifies the sheep that they all decided to forget this tragic event and heads back to the barn. Feeling like she's failed George, Lily heads back to the caravan to say her final goodbye to George before clearing out the memory of him. At that moment, George makes a sudden appearance to tell Lily that he's here because she didn't forget him. George encourages her to try and figure out who really did commit the crime, that they will be safe from getting slaughtered by Caleb, hinting that Rebecca is innocent and she will be the one to make sure that they're safe, revealing a stain on his hands which gives Lily another clue on how to solve the case. With the help of the winter lamb, Lily makes him dip his two hooves into a paint bucket, then goes to Rebecca's cell to make a painting on the floor. The next morning, Tim finds the painting on the floor which shows Rebecca, George in a combined color of yellow and blue. Since he can't make sense of what he's seeing, he decides to clean it off only to get a mix of green on his palm. When the county police officers arrives to take Rebecca to court to be charged with the murder of George, after signing off the documents for Rebecca to be taken away, Tim suddenly finds the little lamb with the painting on his hooves and stops the officer from taking Rebecca away, saying she didn't commit the murder. He points out that since Rebecca arrived in the town, she has been the prime suspect because she had the strongest motive. He believes that the only person named in George's will who has a perfect alibi happens to be Van Vuren, the son George has who's in South Africa. Since George sent the same copy of the will to both siblings, Van Vuren did some digging and learns that his father is worth $30 million and decides he was going to get the money even though he has to kill for it. However, he lacks a motive to do so, so he made sure the $30 million would be transferred to Rebecca so everyone would think she was the one that killed George so she can take the money. The only question now is where's Van Vuren hiding? Just like the way Rebecca had her name changed from Krampf to Rebecca, he believes that Van Vuren had his name changed to Elliot. Elliot tries to tell Tim that he's making a mistake, however Tim reveals the plan Elliot had in mind when he came into the town, which was to appear as a journalist who wants to cover the town's festival. Then he pretends to leave Denbrook. He then purposely have a crash and make it look like an accident so he can return back to the town. After Rebecca left that night of George's murder, Elliot came to his caravan to poison George and planted a new will. George was strong and manages to fight back, but the poison eventually kicks in and he died afterwards. The day the lawyer read the will to everyone, he knew she'll kick him out, so he took advantage of that opportunity to pick the phone when they called and referred to him as Van Vuren. Afterwards he proceeded to plant some evidence in Rebecca's room. However, what he didn't realize is that he left a clue which was in George's hands. One was blue, the other one was green. With the help of the sheeps, he realizes that a mixture of blue and a yellow paint gives you a green stain, which he found on Georgie's palm on the day he was found dead and also on the blue pillowcase he slept with at the inn on the night he murdered George. The night George was murdered, both of his hands were stained with blue color from his sheep medications, and that night during the struggle, George grabbed Elliot's hair, and because Elliot dyed his hair with a cheap yellow material, and because of the rain, the color in George's hand got mixed up, which turns out to be green. Elliot denies the allegation, so Tim proceeds to take a strand of his hair, informing Elliot that he's going to perform a DNA test to see if he is George's son, which also means he's the real killer. Seeing that this could lead to his immediate arrest, Elliot grabs the strand of his hair from Tim and runs to his car. Fortunately, before he could drive away, Ronnie and Reggie arrives just in time to take permission from Lily to bash Elliot's car and proceeds to stand on the roof of the car to establish their dominance. Elliot is then arrested by the county police for the murder of George, while Rebecca is released. Rebecca then goes back to the inn to spend the night there, where Beth reveals that she was once in love with George, but he couldn't love her back because there was no space in his heart for someone else. She also tells Rebecca that her mom's name was Lily. Following this, Rebecca tells Ham and Caleb off when they came to offer her a deal to sell George's farm to them. Later, Rebecca arrives at the farm with Caleb's sheep, since she has also bought his farm too. Now taking the responsibility of her father, Rebecca reads the sheep a story in memory of George. Lily finds the winter lamb standing on the rock where Sebastian once stood and named him George before bringing him to join the flock, and for that moment Lily finds Sebastian floating in the sky in form of a cloud before dissipating.